Okay. Welcome, Night Owls. We're so excited to have you here tonight. And we are super excited to have Paul Michael Garrison with us. It's our book club night, and we have chosen to read Letters to the Editor for September. We hope that some of you or all of you have had the opportunity to snag this book and to read it. It's a really great mystery. In fact, one of our Goodread reviewers said, if you enjoy classic mysteries, don't miss this one. And we full-heartedly agree with that. We're really excited to dig in. But first, Hannah's in the comments if you have questions for Paul Michael. So please shoot him over and we'll make sure that he answers them for you. And we want to start with a brief intro. Paul Michael holds degrees in publishing, theater, and creative writing. His short fiction has appeared in various publications, and he frequently performs with the Greenville Shakespeare Company. Whether on stage or in writing, he enjoys the art of becoming someone else. Letters to the Editor is his first novel. Paul Michael, thank you so much for being here. We'd love to start with you telling us a bit about yourself. Where are you right now, and what a day in the life looks like for you these days?
All right, thanks, Carrie. Right now, I am in my living room in Taylor, South Carolina, in front of my fireplace, which is probably the most picturesque stretch of wall I have. And I actually live a pretty quiet existence. So a typical day for me starts with me getting up as late as possible. I'm not a morning person. And yet I still typically manage to be the first person into the office to open up. I manage a team of writers, editors, and web specialists for a content marketing company. Right now, most of those people are working from home, as much of the country is doing. So right now, it's just me and one other employee who actually shows up to the office on most days. So it's nice to have some human interaction that way. And then after work, I typically head to the gym or run errands. And after that, frequently I'll try to get together with some friends for dinner or engage in some social interaction that way. Otherwise, it's just home to decompress. And if I'm being productive, work on my writing or book-related events then.
Perfect. It sounds like you have a really good balance of things. And I like that because it's very important. All right. So can you tell us a bit about Letters to the Editor and what your inspiration was for the novel?
Okay. Letters to the Editor is set in the publishing community outside Chicago. It follows the investigation of a young detective named Kate Baxter into a series of death threats that are made against a prominent editor named Nathaniel Carver. I semi-jokingly tell people when they ask me where I came up with the idea that I said, like any well-adjusted individual, I asked myself, if I were going to kill someone, how would I do it? And this novel, I guess, is kind of my answer for that. So now I would have to come up with another way. But the idea sprung from kind of that idea. And then I asked myself, well, what could go wrong? Because there is no such thing as a perfect murder. And so I kind of dug into it from that perspective. I took some inspirations from my job because at the time I was an editor for a publishing house. And the inspiration for Kate, my detective, kind of came from a friend of mine who was a young police officer at the time.
I love that. And I don't think that there's anybody that hasn't asked the question, how could I get away with murder or murder type situation? So I love that that was your inspiration. So talking about Kate Baxter, the detective, she's kind of a mess in her own way. Can you tell us about her and what she always was she always intended to have the focus of the story, or did she evolve that way?
I always intended for her to be the focal point of the story. Um, it's interesting to me. I asked a friend of mine just today how he would describe Kate. He hasn't finished the book yet. He's halfway through, and the way he put it, I thought was so succinct and interesting that I'm going to steal that line from him. He described her as a woman who has spent her life fighting the expectations of others. And he talked, and then he elaborated, he said, as we kind of all do. And I thought that was really interesting. And he talked about the idea of her fighting expectations with her family, fighting expectations with her workplace. She comes from a very traditional Christian background. She's a devout believer, but she struggles with how to live out her faith, on a day-to-day basis. She has a closeted smoking habit that she is constantly trying to give up. She's a very independent, strong woman, and she's very confident when she's in the field and dealing with suspects. And yet she has insecurities that she deals with professionally and socially. And so I think she comes out pretty well-rounded from that perspective.
I love that. And she sounds very relatable to a lot of us, doesn't she?
That's really encouraging to hear, because one of the chief goals I had with creating her was for her to be relatable. I'd read a lot of mysteries, or read about a lot of mysteries that kind of featured that older male, hard-bitten, alcoholic, existential, like so broken down, sometimes even nihilistic detective. And I thought, I can't relate to that. And I'm like, I don't think a lot of readers can. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who do. I don't know if they're reading fiction, but and I wanted someone that was more relatable, at least from kind of a middle America perspective. And so when I started with Kate, my building block was the girl next door. And that's where I started from.
I love that. And I think you did a really good job with that. And I think that that's, one of the draws of reading is to find someone that we can connect with and see that, our problems are shared with other people too. And I love that. So part of the fun of the story is that each character, they're all flawed in their own way. And it makes it hard to know who to trust and makes figuring out the killer a lot more fun. Do you have any tips for building realistic, interesting, likable characters?
One of there are, I think, two important aspects of building a realistic character. One of them is consistency. Readers can tell if they're halfway through a novel and then a character starts doing things that don't make sense for that character. People generally don't behave like that in real life. People are generally pretty consistent. So that's one of the keys, I think, to building a realistic character. Another one is complexity. And when I was teaching a creative writing class, that was one of the things that a lot of my students struggled with, was the concept of character complexity. Because I put it towards them as the character being X but Y, and those two things need to be seemingly contradictory to kind of get that complexity. And a lot of times they would come through with things like, my character is poor but kind, and I would say, well, those two things are not mutually exclusive. There are lots of poor, kind people. That doesn't show that type of complexity. But when we were describing Kate, I think some things kind of already came up with that. Like the idea that she is a confident, independent person, but is also insecure in some aspects. And so that those two things that kind of play against each other add like a layer of complexity that shows in real life. I am not a morning person, and yet I am the first person at work at my office in the morning. So that kind of incongruity that's baked into our personalities, I think goes a long way in creating realistic characters.
I love that. Darby asks, do you have some tips for plotting a mystery / thriller?
Tips. Definitely, I think you definitely need to lean towards an outlining style of writing. Writing typically falls into either discovery writing or outlining. The discovery writer, just starts from a go point and follows the story wherever it goes. That doesn't work quite so well with a mystery. With a mystery, I at least from my perspective, I think you need to know where you're going before you start the engine of your car. And kind of having an outline so you know where to drop clues, when to drop clues. You never want the reader to get to the ending of the book and it feel like a cheat. I believe it's important with a mystery that a reader should get to the end and feel like they should have been able to figure that out. Or they should have been able to figure that out on their own. If it completely comes out of left field, a lot of times they feel cheated because there was no way they could have. There was no way they could have figured it out. So with Letters to the Editor, I actually wrote an extensive outline, partly because I started it as a class project, but we couldn't write the entire book. So we had to turn in an outline for the rest of the book. So I had that to work from. But what I actually did was I put that aside and I kind of followed from beat to beat what I knew I wanted to happen next. And I kind of also got into a rhythm. There are a lot of characters in the book. And so I kind of would know after I wrote a chapter with one character that maybe it was time to go back and visit this other character that we hadn't spent time with in a while. And then if I ever got into a place where I felt like I was stuck, then I'd go back and look at my outline and be like, oh yeah, this is where I'm going. This is the next thing that needs to happen. And sometimes I would have written away from my outline. And in that case, I either revise my manuscript or I revise my outline. Usually I revise my outline because I like better what I had come up with on the journey.
I like that. Darby also said that she loved the twists and turns in your book, and she loves that it's set in a publishing world. So I think
Great.
all those add to the great product that you have. So what parts of the novel were the most fun to write and which were the hardest?
I would say probably the most fun sections for me to write were the sections that relate to the character Grant and the character of Mason. They're the two younger men that kind of flank Nathaniel Carver in the story. Grant is his protege that he works with at the editing house. And Mason is the next door neighbor who is a little obsessed with Carver's wife, if one can be a little obsessed. And both of those characters were very fun to write to me. I think maybe partially because they were often in isolation. They were both kind of secretive characters, and that gave me an opportunity to, I think, play a little bit more with language and symbology in those passages. um, and kind of dip into the poetic register a little bit, which isn't necessarily something you think of with a murder mystery as often. As far as parts that were more difficult to write, the only passage I think I can really remember really struggling with was one of the action sequences. And I think that's because you can approach action sequences in two different ways. One is you can be poetic and kind of nebulous. The downside to that is clarity. It might sound really pretty, but it's not going to be super clear to the reader what happened. So if that's important, that's not the way to go. If you want the reader to be able to clearly visualize what's happening, then you need to be very precise. And it's very difficult to balance that clear visualizing of it yourself and the precise language, and yet keep it rolling, because an action sequence should read quickly, should pull you through it. And when you're trying to be very precise, you can get really bogged down in trying to describe every detail so that it is easily visualized. So I would say those are actually some of the harder to write sequences for me.
Interesting. I like that perspective. So, did you learn anything surprising about your characters or about yourself while writing letters to the editor?
I'm not sure that I learned anything surprising about myself, or I might have, but I actually wrote the manuscript a few years ago, so I may have forgotten what I learned about myself. I do remember there was a lot of discovery for me with, especially with Mason's character. He really grew and rounded out for me kind of on his own as the novel progressed. And that was really interesting to me. And it was also really important to me that he not come across as one-dimensional. And I hope that he doesn't, because I saw him grow as the novel progressed. And that was really interesting to me. I wasn't expecting that necessarily.
That's really cool. Okay, so one really interesting thing about you in that addition to being an excellent writer, you're also an actor. Do you feel that the two influence each other? A, if so, in what ways? Or B, if not, what different skill sets do you use and how do you keep them separate?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. I think that being an actor does complement being a writer. I'm not sure that it goes the other way around. Maybe it does. But for me, I think the experience of being an actor and that practice of building a character is very helpful for fiction writing. Because in essence, you're kind of doing the same thing on a grand scale. You're creating all the characters in the book instead of one character in the play. And it's being an actor is kind of training yourself to think about what it's like to be in someone else's shoes and put yourself in a different perspective, because I'm a character actor. I typically don't play leads. I'm usually not the romantic guy. I joke around that I typically play creepers, clowns, and drunks. Those are my three focus groups that I typically get cast as. But the nice thing about being a character actor is you are definitely playing someone that is not like you. And so you get that experience of trying to put on someone else's clothes and inhabit someone else's being. And if you're going to write interesting characters that don't all seem like each other, that's what the writer needs to do. And it's fine to write characters that are like you. You just can't do that all the time. There are some writers that, if you read very many of their short stories, you start to realize this is her. This is who this person is, because the protagonist will always be very similar, and it's good to push out from that, I think.
Well, I'm super glad you didn't get a complex about just being a drunk or a creeper. I think you're lovely. So can you tell us a bit about your writing process, like how you do it, what maybe special things that you do to incorporate how you get to that end result of a novel?
Okay. Well, like I said, with Letters to the Editor, it was definitely an outline process, where I mapped out pretty much the entire book, and then wrote from point to point. But I don't always take the same process with every project. I have another manuscript that I worked on where I kind of picked a focus for each chapter and let that kind of that one focus embody the entire chapter. And so I knew what that chapter was going to be about, and I focused on it chapter by chapter, basically by writing one chapter, then picking a focus for the next chapter and writing that, so that became its own thing. But I think I always have to have the final destination in mind. It may change, but I can't be one of those discovery writers that just starts from nowhere. I might be able to do that for a short story, but for a novel, I have to know where I'm going. I'm not a Sunday afternoon driver. I don't get in my car and head off somewhere without knowing where I'm going. I can't really do that with my writing either.
I think those are great. So there's a lot of questions about your writing. So Hannah asks, how much time do you spend writing every day when you are being productive?
When I'm being productive, not enough. I will admit that. I usually try to gauge it not by time, but by a word count. I usually try to give myself a word count for the day. And that way, if I'm struggling and it takes me an hour to reach that word count, I haven't shortchanged myself for if I'm, really on the ball and I reach that word count, in the first 20 minutes. If I'm really on the ball and I do hit that word count early, chances are I'll probably keep writing beyond that. And then that's just gravy, to get past that. But I would probably say 20 minutes to an hour.
That's awesome. Well, you're a psychic because you guessed what the next question was. Jan asks, when you write, do you have a goal for the number of pages or words to complete each day? Also, when do you edit?
When do I edit? I typically, I always have a word count in mind, and if I'm being very disciplined, if I don't hit my word count or I skip a day, I will add that to the following day and kind of let it a debt build up until I've written myself out of that debt. As far as when the editing occurs, usually that happens later. I'm not a sprinter as far as running, well, I'm not a sprinter as far as running goes, but writing either. I spend a lot of time as I go. And generally that means hopefully less editing down the road. But I usually will write in a big chunk and then I will go back. The project I'm working on right now, I wrote a chunk of it's roughly 14,000, 15,000 words. And I'm now going back and editing through that section. So I have done some editing beforehand, but I like to have a lot of a flow that I can go back through. Now, if I've been away from my computer for a while, you always kind of have to peek back to see, okay, where did I leave off? And so if I do something like that, then I'll definitely get caught up in editing the previous chapter that I'm looking over, just for memory's sake. But usually I leave the editing for another phase. I try and get several chapters out and then go back and revise after that.
That's awesome. Well, now you've piqued my curiosity. I'm sure you've piqued a lot of other people's. How many words do you try to get out a day?
It's actually right now, it's very small. I shoot for 200.
That's a great start. And little goals, baby steps are all writing's about, right? Just getting
right. Sometimes a couple years ago for NaNoWriMo, I didn't participate in NaNoWriMo, but I had some friends who were, and I took that same month to I tried to double or triple my output for that month. And so I think I was doing maybe 600 a day, for that month. And it really worked. I really plowed through the rough draft I was working on. I didn't do a lot else, but it was good for that.
Well, good. And I think that's a great exercise to help stretch people. So is mystery a genre that you'll stick with? And if so, why or why not?
I would like to write more mysteries. I would also like to write a lot of other things. One of my favorite writers is Madeleine L'Engle, and one of the things that I really admire about her career is the breadth of what she wrote. I mean, her favorite books of mine are her children's fantasy novels, but she also wrote for adults. She wrote picture books. She wrote poetry and nonfiction and plays. Just that wide gamut. And I don't know that I want to write everything through there, but I don't really want to be pinned in to just one genre. I have a completed manuscript right now that I'm pitching to different places, and it's actually a fantasy manuscript.
Cool. That's really cool. So are you working, you said that one's ready to pitch. Are you working on something else? And will we see more Kate Baxter in the future?
Yeah. Actually, the project I am working on right now is another mystery, or maybe it might be more accurate to call it a crime novel. And it may or may not feature Kate Baxter. So, I mean, it's early days, but I would love for Kate to make a reappearance.
That was an excellent teaser. Away. Okay, so we want to do a shotgun round. So we want you to tell us your current favorite on the next couple things. Are you ready for that?
Okay.
Okay, so your favorite author?
I'll probably go with Madeleine L'Engle as one of my all-time favorites.
Good choice, good choice. Okay, favorite book?
I just looked over the books that I've read this year, and my favorite from this year so far is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman.
Ooh, I'll have to look that one up. That sounds really cool. Okay, favorite music?
I have to give a shout out to my favorite composer, Carl Jenkins.
Ooh, what kind of music is it?
He does kind of a East meets West kind of blend of contemporary classical. He is currently the most performed living composer in the world.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm going to go look him up now. So thank you for that recommendation and that plug. Okay. Favorite current television show?
Probably, since there is a new season dropping, I'll say Fargo.
That's one I have not seen yet.
The first season has excellent writing. The character arcs and the plotting are excellent in the first season.
So that's a good resource for some of our writers, right? Is good writing. Go watch it on TV.
Definitely.
Okay. Favorite movie?
One of my old favorites that I've been trying to get a friend to watch with me is Galaxy Quest.
Oh, such a good one.
I couldn't believe she'd never seen it, so it's on our to watch soon list.
Oh, such a good one. Makes you laugh a lot. All right, and your favorite snack?
Oh, I have a lot of sweet teeth. Tend to be a sucker for ice cream.
Oh, I am too, unfortunately. That's awesome. All right, so is there anything else that you'd like to tell us, like to share with us, like to share with your readers?
I don't have anything specific, so but I'm open to any questions that anybody might have.
Okay, well, Hannah's been sending me some. She did say, Steven said, just bought it and looking forward to reading. So got
Great.
some fans here for you. We'll wait just a minute and see if there's anything else that anyone wants to ask you. But you've given us a fun behind the scenes look of what it's like in your life, and great characters and great tips on how to better your writing. I love you're talking about mapping things out so well, and it's interesting how all different writers have different things that help them, but I do think that mapping and writing out what you're going to do is a great way to keep you focused and be able to get to the end goal of where you want to go. I haven't heard from Hannah yet, but hopefully if there's anyone that still has any questions, that they can sneak them in. We've so much enjoyed talking to you, and right now Letters to the Editor is only 99 cents. That's a steal for a limited time. So grab your copy before the price goes up, and enjoy this wonderful mystery with all of the great characters that seem to have some baggage, right? Lots of baggage. Okay, Shannon asks, what's your favorite writing drink or snack? So you have your favorite snack, but what's your favorite one to do while you're writing?
Oh, I generally don't tend to eat while I'm writing. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. If I'm going to drink something while I'm writing, chances are it's probably a juice of some kind. Unless I'm really sleepy, and then it'll be Mountain Dew.
That's interesting. The juice. I like that. Enough sugar, but not enough buzz, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, I think that's all. I've so much enjoyed being with you tonight, and I know that we've had lots of people watch with us, and hope everyone's enjoyed it as much as we have. So thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you so much, Paul Michael, for all your tips and tricks, and for sharing a little bit about the day in the life of you. So thank you so much, and we hope that we get to see more from you soon.
Right. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Subscribe to our channel so you'll never miss an upload, or join us live every Thursday for author interviews, book clubs, writing advice, and more on Facebook at Owl Hollow Press, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. See you Thursday.